They say the holidays are for family, togetherness, laughter, love. But on Christmas Day, I found myself abandoned, betrayed, and in that bitter silence, I learned the value of my presence, and the weight of being unwanted. "Wait at the airport, Mom. I'll be there soon to pick you up." That's what Victoria, my only daughter, had said. I smiled through the receiver. "All right, sweetheart. I can't wait to see Emma's little face." She replied with an unbothered, "See you soon," before the call ended in a click. No warmth. No holiday joy in her voice. I arrived at Denver International Airport at 2:47 p.m., gift bags straining my fingers, my back aching from the flight. The terminal was a flurry of laughter, reunion, and excitement. People embracing with teary eyes. Children squealing as they ran into their grandparents' arms. Couples kissing beneath plastic mistletoe dangling from signs. But me? I stood alone, 6 perfectly wrapped bags at my feet, and a carry-on suitcase trailing behind me like a tired pet. One of the bags held my mother's emerald necklace, a family heirloom passed down from her mother to mine to me. Today, I was ready to pass it to Victoria. Another bag carried a cashmere scarf for her husband, Martin, from the same boutique he always pretended not to notice but clearly adored. And the red bag, bright, shiny, and tied with a gold ribbon, held a genuine American Girl doll for little Emma. Her very first. I dialed Victoria as I stepped outside into the snowfall. "Mom." Her voice was curt. "I've landed. Just letting you know I'm here." "Oh, yeah. We're just running late. Wait at the pickup exit, okay?" "No, can't wait to see you. No Merry Christmas. Just instructions," like she was speaking to a delivery person. "I can grab a coffee while I wait," I said. "No need. We won't be long." The line went dead. So I stood by the exit doors, trying to balance optimism with the gnawing chill of dismissal. Around me, families came and went in waves of reunion. Smiles. Joy. Arms outstretched. I kept glancing toward the cars, looking for her SUV. Looking for my granddaughter's sweet face. Looking for some trace of love. By 3:15, I'd received a text. "Still running late. Be patient. Not sorry. Not we're hurrying. Just cold efficiency." Like I was someone to be managed, not welcomed. I adjusted the bags around my feet. My legs were stiff from the flight, my coat damp from the falling snow. I stared at the small velvet jewelry box in the burgundy gift bag and ran my gloved thumb across it. 3 generations of women had worn those emeralds. I'd worn them on my wedding day. Now they were Victoria's. At least, they were supposed to be. 3:45. Then 4:20. Then 5:10. I dragged myself inside and found a bench near the windows. The warm air barely helped. My heart beat slower. Heavier. Like it was bracing itself for what I didn't want to admit. The longer I waited, the more invisible I felt. My phone sat still in my hand. No updates. No missed calls. I finally called. "Mom," I said, "just wait. We'll be there in a bit." "You've been saying that for nearly 3 hours, Victoria." A sigh. "We're busy, okay? There's a lot going on. You said you wanted me here. We didn't expect you this early. You told me to arrive today." There was a pause, then, "Can we not do this now?" The line went silent again. I sat in that terminal and watched the world swirl past, parents carrying kids, couples clutching each other's hands, friends laughing through tears. I was surrounded by love stories. And yet I felt like a plot twist no one wanted. At 6:30 p.m., I finally ordered coffee and soup at a nearby cafe. The barista wished me Merry Christmas with a kindness that almost made me cry. The soup was lukewarm, the coffee bitter. But the warmth of the cup in my hand was the only thing that felt real anymore. I remembered the envelopes in my coat. 3 of them. $50,000 for Victoria. $50,000 for Martin. And $75,000 for an education fund, just like my late husband and I had promised before he passed. That money came from selling Baker's Antiques, our life's work. We'd built it from a dusty roadside stall to a nationally known business. And after David passed away, I'd poured my grief into preparing for this Christmas, making it magical for the ones I loved. But as I sat there in that chair, Watching the last customers leave the cafe, I realized I was the only one who'd made an effort. At 7:15, I called again. "Mom, what now?" Victoria sounded irritated. "I've been here for 5 hours. It's Christmas. There's traffic. You could have told me not to come. I didn't think you'd actually book the flight." Silence. It hit me like a slap. "I didn't think you'd actually come. Not I missed you. Not I'm sorry. Just regret that I had shown up at all." I gathered my things and walked to the airport hotel across the terminal bridge. As I sat in that sterile, overpriced room, staring out at the snow, I took out the envelopes and placed them on the desk. Then I picked up the phone. The Bank of Colorado answered on the second ring. "Hi, yes," I said, my voice suddenly clear. "I'd like to place a stop on 3 certified checks." "No, they haven't been cashed." "Not yet. And I'd also like to make some changes to my will." I didn't cry that night. Not in the hotel bathroom, where I wiped makeup from my aging face with hotel-issue tissues. Not in the stiff bed with sheets that smelled like bleach. Not when I removed the velvet box from Victoria's gift bag and held it up to the bedside lamp. The emerald sparkled anyway, oblivious to everything that had changed. I just lay there, wide-eyed in the darkness, the television whispering some late-night sitcom no one ever laughed at anymore. But when I did sleep, briefly, I dreamed I was still waiting at the airport doors, only this time the exit never opened, and every time I looked at my reflection in the glass, I looked older and older and older. At 6:12 a.m., I woke with a start and sat upright. Something in me had shifted. This wasn't sadness anymore. This wasn't disappointment. It was revelation. Cold, sharp, irrefutable revelation. They didn't forget me. They chose not to come. I checked out of the hotel just before 7. The lobby was quiet, nearly empty, except for a man in a red scarf flipping through a Denver Post and a sleepy couple dragging their toddler toward the breakfast buffet. I wore the same outfit from yesterday, gray wool trousers, low-heeled boots, a cranberry turtleneck, and the beige trench coat David had bought me 2 winters before his heart attack. My silver-gray hair was neatly brushed back into a bun. I looked presentable, controlled, polite. But inside, I was building a storm. The taxi driver was a cheerful man with a thick accent and the name Matteo on his dashboard. I told him the address and sat back as Denver began to brighten through a thin blanket of snow. The sun looked cold, distant, a silent observer. It was a 36-minute drive. 36 minutes of pretending this wasn't going to hurt more than anything. We pulled up to the suburban home Victoria and Martin had bought the year before. 2 stories. Beige siding. A stone pathway flanked by symmetrical boxwoods. The kind of place you could find in any magazine labeled Modern American Family. But what caught my eye first wasn't the house. It was the black Range Rover in the driveway. So they had been home. The entire time. "Want me to wait?" Matteo asked, glancing back at me. I hesitated. "No, thank you." I stepped out slowly, gathering my purse and 1 bag. I'd left the others behind, including the envelopes. I walked up the path with boots crunching softly in the frost. I imagined foolishly that Victoria might open the door and gasp in joy. That she'd say, "Mom, oh my God, what are you doing here?" And then hug me tight, her guilt melting into affection. But the porch was dark. No wreath on the door. No welcome mat. No warmth. I rang the bell. And I waited. Nothing. I knocked. This time harder. After a long pause, I heard footsteps. Then the door creaked open just enough for Martin to poke his head out. His expression twisted into something between confusion and dread. "Helen." "Good morning," I said flatly. He blinked. "Ah. Victoria's upstairs. I don't think she's awake yet." I didn't move. "You weren't at the airport." He exhaled like I'd just confirmed a major inconvenience. "Well, things got busy. I was there for over 10 hours, Martin." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, it's Christmas. We had guests, dinner prep. You should have called again." I did. 35 times. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "Do you want to come in?" I didn't reply. I stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me instantly, but it didn't comfort. It offended. The place looked untouched by family life. Not a single Christmas toy on the floor. Not a jacket tossed over a chair. Just perfect symmetry. Perfect stillness. Like someone had decorated it for a magazine shoot and left before any real living began. Then I saw Victoria at the top of the stairs. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even ashamed. She just stared at me, hair in a messy bun, robe half-tied, mascara smudged from sleep, and said, "I told you not to call a taxi." I stared at her. "You also told me to wait." Victoria sighed and descended the stairs slowly. "This isn't a good time. I came for Christmas. You came uninvited." That landed harder than anything. "Uninvited? I brought gifts," I said quietly. "We don't need gifts." "No," I agreed. "You needed a check." Her face stiffened. "Mom, don't make this ugly." "Ugly?" I felt my voice rising. "I spent weeks preparing. I booked the flight in August. I packed Margaret's emeralds. I wrote you a check for $50,000. Martin went pale. "I had an education fund for Emma. I had gifts for both of you." Victoria crossed her arms. "Is this about the money now?" "It's about the fact that you didn't show up." Martin cut in. "Look, we were overwhelmed. Emma had a fever. The food burned. Our babysitter cancelled. She could have told me. One message. One honest message. She was scared you'd get upset." I laughed bitterly. "And this is better?" Silence fell. Emma appeared in the hallway behind them, clutching a stuffed animal. She looked sleepy and confused. "Grandma." Victoria tensed. I bent slightly. "Hi, sweetheart. Merry Christmas." Emma smiled and held out her arms. But Victoria blocked her. "Go upstairs, honey." My heart cracked open like thin ice beneath a heavy step. "I see," I said. "She's not allowed to love me now either?" "Mom." "No. It's okay. This is the clarity I needed." I reached into my purse, pulled out the velvet necklace box, and set it on the console table by the door. "Keep the stones," I said. "They're just glass now." I turned to leave, but Victoria whispered behind me. "I didn't want you to come because you always bring expectations. Money. Control. Judgments. And then you act surprised when no one meets them." I stopped at the threshold. I looked back. "I brought love, Victoria. And you buried it under your resentment." I stepped outside. The porch light still wasn't on. Just the cold. I didn't call a taxi. I walked 3 blocks to a diner and ordered pancakes and coffee with strangers who knew how to smile. And there, for the first time in 24 hours, I finally cried. The diner was small. The kind that still served coffee in thick ceramic mugs and had sticky menus laminated decades ago. The waitress called me Han, and the cook behind the counter wore a Santa hat with grease stains on the white pom-pom. It smelled of bacon, pancakes, and burnt hope. I sat in a booth by the window, coat still on, gift bag at my feet, and stared at my untouched pancakes. They'd given me 2 perfect golden rounds stacked neatly, a curl of butter melting on top like a cruel reminder of tradition. The kind of breakfast I used to make for Victoria on snowy Saturday mornings. But now it just looked theatrical. Fake. I stirred the coffee instead. Not because I needed it sweeter, but because the clink of the spoon distracted me from the growing pressure behind my ribs. Everything was silent around me, except the occasional clatter of dishes and the faint hum of a Christmas carol playing on the radio. "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." I bit the inside of my cheek. I didn't want to cry in public again. I was too old to be caught in moments like this, head bowed, eyes watery, choking back betrayal with syrup and salt. Then the front door jingled, and an older woman stepped in, arms full of boxes. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair windblown under a red knit cap. She looked around, spotted me alone, and smiled like she knew the ache of being left behind. She sat a few booths over and ordered the usual. The waitress didn't even write it down. That's when I realized, this wasn't the first time someone had come here to nurse a wound on Christmas morning. I wasn't the only one with a perfect daughter who turned into a stranger. By noon, I had made up my mind. I called my lawyer. Yes, on Christmas Day. To his credit, Nathan answered with surprising warmth and just enough professionalism to get through the awkwardness of my call. Mrs. Baker? Everything all right? No, I said plainly. But it will be. I explained what I needed. A quick adjustment to my will. Removal of beneficiaries. Redirection of the education fund. I wanted the money to go elsewhere. Nathan listened without judgment. Where would you like the assets to be reallocated? I'm still deciding, I said. But not to anyone who leaves their mother in an airport for 10 hours. He chuckled softly. Understood. We hung up with plans to formalize everything after the holidays. And just like that, a lifetime of intentions shifted with one phone call. Years of sacrifice. Of working holidays. Of skipped vacations and saved receipts. All of it. Because my daughter, who once used to fall asleep in my arms, had grown into someone who saw me as an obligation. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the hotel. The concierge, a kind young man with a dimple in his cheek, handed me a fresh keycard without asking questions. I appreciated that more than he knew. Back in my room, I placed the burgundy gift bag Victoria's on the desk and stared at it for a long time. I thought about throwing it away. But then I thought of Emma. So I opened the bag, removed the emerald necklace box, and replaced it with the doll I'd bought for her. The one she'd mentioned during a video call. She has red hair just like Grandma. Emma had squealed. She remembered me that day. Now, I wanted her to remember me always, but for the right reasons. For kindness. For thoughtfulness. Not for guilt wrapped in velvet. Then I scribbled a note on hotel stationery. To Emma. This is from the grandma who once made gingerbread houses with you and let you eat the candy off the roof. I hope you grow up loved, honest, and free from the weight of other people's bitterness. Merry Christmas, darling. Grandma Helen. I spent the next 2 days in Denver, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to grieve. Not just the betrayal, but the version of my family I had held onto like gospel. I visited Margaret's grave at Rosewood Cemetery. I stood in the cold with stiff knees and trembling lips and told her everything. How Victoria had become icy. How the warmth we raised her with had been replaced with sharp corners and tighter bank accounts. She left me at the airport, Margaret, I whispered. On Christmas Day. The wind was bitter. Silent. But in my chest, something was thawing. I donated the rest of the gift bags, Martin's scarf, the toy train for Emma's brother, the gourmet chocolates I'd selected with care, to a local women's shelter. The woman at the desk, perhaps in her early 40s, took the bags with a gracious smile. These will go a long way, she said. So had I. The next morning, as I packed to fly home, I pulled out the last envelope, the $75,000 education fund. I stared at the label that read Emma and future grandkids. Then I crossed out the name. And I wrote, the Baker Fund, for any child who feels forgotten. I would create a scholarship in Margaret's name. For kids like Emma, who needed to be reminded that family isn't always blood, and love isn't something you should ever have to wait 10 hours for. On the plane home, a woman beside me asked what I'd done for Christmas. I smiled. I reclaimed it. She looked confused. I thought I was going to visit family, I said. But I ended up finding something more valuable. And what's that? Freedom. From disappointment. She didn't ask more questions. She just nodded, then looked back at her book. And that was enough. Back in my small hometown, I was greeted by snow and silence. My house was still filled with Margaret's memory, photos in the hallway, her handwriting on recipes in the kitchen drawer. But instead of feeling empty, the house felt like sanctuary. I unpacked slowly, methodically. I opened the last of the bags and pulled out the emerald necklace. It belonged to no one now. So I wore it. I stood in front of the mirror in my living room, the green stones resting just below my throat. My reflection showed the lines of age, yes. But also dignity. Resilience. This necklace wouldn't skip a generation. It would stay with me. For now. For always. It was December 28th when she came. I'd just finished boiling water for tea, the kettle whistling sharp and shrill in my quiet kitchen. My hands, still stiff from Denver's cold, wrapped around a ceramic mug with faded violets on it, a gift from Victoria years ago when Emma was born. Back when she still signed cards with hearts and "Love you, Mom." The knock at the door was timid. Not urgent. Almost ashamed. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbors knew better than to visit unannounced, and all my bridge club ladies had gone to Florida or were busy with family. I peered through the curtain, careful not to be seen. There she stood. Victoria. Wrapped in an elegant camel coat I hadn't seen before. Her dark hair pulled into a loose twist. Makeup perfect. Lips tight. Hands folded in front of her like a child waiting for permission to speak. I considered not opening it. But I did. Not for her. For me. "Mom," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. It caught in her throat like it didn't belong there. "Victoria," I replied, stepping back without warmth. She entered slowly, eyes scanning the living room. Same furniture, same pictures, Margaret's portrait above the mantel, the old cuckoo clock still frozen at 4:12. She noticed the emerald necklace immediately. "You're wearing it." I nodded. Someone should. She lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair, like she wasn't sure she was welcome on it. "I owe you an explanation." I stayed silent. She went on anyway. "There was a conversation. Martin and I had been talking about inheritance. About you moving in. About how Emma's education might affect our finances. And," she trailed off, chewing her lip. I raised an eyebrow. "And you decided not to pick up your mother at the airport because what, guilt made you late?" She shook her head. "No. We didn't plan to be that late. We just, after I spoke to you on the phone, Martin said maybe it was better if you got a taxi. That you'd be more comfortable at a hotel. That we could talk things through before you got to the house. So you waited until I'd been abandoned for 10 hours to talk things through?" I said, my voice calm but pointed. She looked down. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. We didn't expect you to wait that long. We thought you'd just go to a hotel. That maybe you'd get the message." The words hit me like sleet to the face. I sipped my tea. "So that was the message. That I'm no longer convenient." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "No. Mom, it's just, everything's complicated now. We have Emma, and Martin's job is unstable. You talk about gifts and education funds and moving closer, but it scares us. We don't want obligations. We just want to breathe." I studied her. My daughter. The one I raised to be brave, generous, thoughtful. Who used to braid Margaret's hair for fun, who cried at age 12 when her friend's cat died. Now she sat in front of me, trembling from the weight of her own selfishness. "You used to be someone I admired," I said softly. "Now I don't even recognize you." Her tears fell then. And for a moment, the room filled with the sound of her quiet sobbing, heavier than snowfall, deeper than any wind. "Mom, I came to ask if I'm still in your will." I didn't flinch. There it was. The real reason. The truth she dressed in guilt and wrapped in apology. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. Took the file from the drawer. Dropped it gently on the coffee table. "It's all updated," I said. "The Baker Fund is no longer in your name. The house will go to the local women's shelter when I pass. The emeralds will be donated to the Museum of Colorado Heritage. And everything else, every last dollar, will go to people who show up." She paled. "Mom, you're punishing Emma for my mistakes." "No," I said. "I'm protecting Emma from becoming you." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just shallow gasps as she stared at the file, the legal edges of her consequences. "Please," she whispered. I leaned over, picked up the necklace box still lying on the shelf, unopened from years ago. I opened it and let her look, green stones gleaming under the dim light. Our family's legacy. Then I closed it and held it to my chest. "You didn't just forget to pick me up," I said. "You tried to quietly erase me. But I'm still here." She stood abruptly. "So that's it?" "No," I replied. "That's just the beginning." She stormed out. The door slammed like punctuation. I exhaled, slowly. The kettle on the stove began whistling again. I hadn't even noticed it still boiling. The first thing I did after she left was lock the door, not out of fear, but finality. I stood there for a moment, hand on the doorknob, listening to the quiet tick of the old wall clock. 6:12 p.m. 3 days after Christmas. 3 days since the airport. 3 days since I realized my own daughter didn't just forget me, she measured my worth and decided I was too heavy to carry forward. It would have broken me years ago. But not now. Now it focused me. The will had already been rewritten, true. But I wasn't done. There were still memories in this house that belonged to people who showed up. Margaret's framed baking awards, my wedding photos, Emma's drawings on the fridge from when she was 6 and loved me without condition. And there were plans to make. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Marcia. "Morning, Helen," she said, her voice chipper as ever. "Something wrong?" "No," I said, tying my robe at the waist. "Something finally feels right. I'd like to schedule a meeting next week. Want to add something to the charitable trust." "Absolutely. Shall I bring the revised documents?" "Bring everything. And Marcia, make sure my daughter receives nothing except a letter." Her voice didn't falter. "Understood." The second call was to Denise, an old friend of mine who ran Renewed Roots, a local nonprofit for women over 50 seeking housing, employment, and second chances. I donated every Christmas, but this time was different. "Denise," I said, "how much would it take to sponsor a permanent residential wing for women abandoned by their families?" She gasped. "Helen, are you serious?" "I'm very serious. And I want my name nowhere on it. Name it after Margaret." By the time I hung up, something in me had shifted. I wasn't grieving the loss of Victoria anymore. I was grieving the years I'd spent believing I still needed her validation. Later that day, I found myself flipping through an old scrapbook. One of those heavy ones, bound in leather, with sticky pages covered in photos and captions. There was Victoria in pigtails, holding her first bicycle. There was Margaret in the kitchen, flour on her cheeks, laughing like it was oxygen. And there I was, young, hopeful, building a life with love. The love hadn't vanished. It had simply moved. 2 days later, I received a letter. Not from Victoria, but from Emma. Written in crayon. "Dear Nana, Mommy says we couldn't pick you up because Daddy got sick, but I think she was fibbing. I miss you. When can I see you again? I made you a picture of a rainbow and a house. The house is you. Love, Emma." It broke something in me. But it also built something. Because no matter what her mother said, Emma still knew where home was. I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I drove to the post office and sent a small package back to her, a card, a new storybook, and a locket. Inside was a photo of the 2 of us from last Christmas, and the words, "Never forget you're loved." She wouldn't understand the legacy of the emeralds yet. But she'd know this, her Nana hadn't vanished. And she never would. On New Year's Eve, I received a knock. Not Victoria. Not Martin. But Denise. She stood there on my front porch, cheeks pink from the cold, scarf flapping in the wind. Behind her, a small group of women emerged from a van. "This is Carol, Janine, and Tanya," she said, motioning to the others. "They've got nowhere to be tonight." I was wondering, would you be okay hosting a quiet little New Year's dinner? I blinked. Then smiled. "Come in," I said. "But you'd better like cabbage rolls and loud jazz records." We laughed. And for the first time in weeks, the house echoed with warmth again. As the clock ticked past midnight, glasses raised, laughter filled the air, not the laugh of perfect family holidays or tidy traditions, but the rough, imperfect sound of women who had been tossed aside and kept walking anyway. Women like me. I looked around the room and realized something Margaret used to say was finally true. Sometimes the family that loves you most are the ones you meet along the way. 2 months passed before Victoria showed up. I'd been pruning roses in the backyard, my gloves dirty and worn thin at the fingertips, when I heard the front gate creak open. The sound was hesitant, like the person behind it wasn't sure they had a right to be there. I knew that sound. I didn't rush. I clipped one more stem before standing, wiping my gloves slowly on my apron, and walking to the front. There she was. Victoria. My daughter. Standing in a wool coat far too fine for her character, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses though there wasn't much sun. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. "No, Emma. No, Martin. Just her. I thought I'd find you here, she said. You did, I replied. I didn't invite her in. She looked thinner than I remembered. Maybe guilt eats at a person. Or maybe not enough truth in a home can starve everyone under its roof. I got your letter, she said, pulling out the envelope I'd written after the lawyer finalized the trust changes. I didn't expect it to be so cold. I let out a soft breath, steady. It wasn't cold. It was truthful. There's a difference. Victoria's face twitched. You left us nothing, Mom. Not even the emeralds. I stepped forward slightly, gloves still dangling from my fingers. You left me first. Her mouth opened in protest, but she knew better. She remembered the 12 hours I waited. She remembered the silence. She knew that wasn't an accident, it was a decision. You wanted money, I said gently. But you traded something far more valuable to get it. She scoffed, blinking fast. We thought you'd embarrass us. You always bring too much attention. The stories, the old photos. Martin didn't want you staying with us. We just figured it'd be easier. I nodded slowly. Easier. The word hung between us like fog. Do you know where the emeralds are now? I asked. They're on display at Renewed Roots, alongside stories of every woman that foundation now supports. Emma's education fund was split between 5 women who've gone back to school at 50. One of them is becoming a midwife. Imagine that. Her lip trembled. So you just gave everything away? No. I gave it to people who showed up. She stepped back. So that's it? You're done being my mother. I paused, then walked toward her slowly. I will always be your mother, Victoria. But I don't have to let you treat me like I'm optional. Love doesn't mean waiting forever on cold curbs with gifts that never get opened. She swallowed, but said nothing. I hope one day Emma learns that love is presence, not perfection, I said. And if she ever shows up at my door, she'll always be welcome. But you'll have to knock. I turned and walked back toward my garden. She didn't follow. Weeks later, Emma sent another letter. This time, the envelope was full of hand-drawn hearts and glitter. Nana, Mommy says we won't see you anymore, but I don't believe her. Can I come for Easter? I wept holding that letter. I sent back a small basket with a chocolate bunny, a tiny book of poems, and a note. Whenever you're ready, my door is open. Love, Nana. Time passed. The women of Renewed Roots became my unexpected family. Every month, we hosted storytelling nights in my living room. Janine brought her guitar. Tanya made bread that tasted like memory. And I shared Margaret's recipes from our old cookbooks. There was laughter. There were tears. But mostly, there was healing. One afternoon, as daffodils began pushing through the snow, Denise handed me a newspaper. The headline, Local Woman's Gift Reshapes Lives of Older Women Across State. They had written about me. But more importantly, they had written about Margaret. About how her quiet generosity, passed through me, bloomed into something vast. I stared at the article for a long time. Not for pride, but for peace. Because sometimes love doesn't look like family photos or dinners or gifts under a tree. Sometimes it looks like this. A woman in her late 60s, forgotten at an airport. Becoming the one everyone else finds their way home to.